All right, hockey card fans. Hockey Night in Belmont is back after a long period with another hockey card reveal. I bought some 1977 WHA hockey cards, 15 in all. Went to Heroes Cards and Comics and picked them out. Much easier than going on eBay. eBay is kind of frustrating, trying to find what you want. And this way I get no doubles. This was a small set, only 66 cards. And now I have 46 of them, so I'm getting there. I need 20 more. So the first card we got is Jean Bernier, defenseman, Quebec Nordiques. This was his rookie card and his only card. He's one and done. He was drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks in the 11th round of the 1974 draft. So he was 188th overall. And he never played in the NHL. He played his entire career in the W. And this was his last official season, 77-78. Next up, we got goalie Joe Daly, or Daly from the Winnipeg Jets. Not sure how you pronounce that name. Is it Daly or Daly? I think Daly. He had played 106 games in the NHL with the Pittsburgh Penguins, Buffalo Sabres, and Detroit Red Wings. So he never got to play with any really good teams. Pittsburgh was an expansion. Buffalo was an expansion. The Wings sucked in the 70s. Undrafted. Then he jumped to the WHA and he won 2 Avco trophies. Or was it 3? He might have won 3. But he played from the Jets, 308 games. And was an all-star goalie in that league. Next up, we got center Ron Chipperfield, now with the Edmonton Oilers. He had played for the Calgary Cowboys, who had folded in 1977. He was drafted in the first round, 17th overall by the California Golden Seals back in 1974. So he was a fairly high draft pick, but he never played for the Golden Seals or the Cleveland Barons. Instead, he jumped right to the W, played with the Vancouver Blazers, who then moved to Calgary, became the Cowboys, and when they folded, Chipperfield was sent to the Edmonton Oilers, where he played 2 years with the Edmonton Oilers in the W. Then he went to the NHL when they expanded. So he played with Wayne Gretzky for 2 years, and then he was traded near the end of the season in 1980 to the Quebec Nordiques, and then played only a couple more games after that. Had some success in the W. So Ron Chipperfield, those are ugly jerseys, the Calgary Cowboys. They had some terrible jerseys. Just a red and white, so the Canadian flag colors, but with a cowboy hat in the middle. That was just dumb, really dumb. Next up, we get Houston Aeros goalie Wayne Rutledge. Houston Aeros, they should have been one of the teams picked for the expansion. Because they knew they weren't, they folded after the 77 season. He had played with the LA Kings for 3 seasons before jumping to the WHA, and his last season was 77-78 with Houston. So he played his entire W career with Houston. So he played with the Hows. You got Mark Napier, Birmingham Bulls, right wing. Birmingham was another team that might have been considered for the merger expansion in '79. It was a possibility, but the NHL didn't want any more teams than 4, and they folded after the 78-79 season. This is not Mark Napier's rookie card. It's a second-year card. He was a first-round draft pick, 10th overall by the Montreal Canadiens in 1977. But he is already playing in the W for 2 years. He played for the Toronto Toros, and when the Toros couldn't make a go of it because they were sharing the Maple Leaf Gardens with Toronto Maple Leafs, and Harold Ballard was such an asshole to them, which good reason, They moved to Birmingham down in Alabama. He scored 60 goals in Birmingham his first season there, and 33 in the last year he was there, as well as 43 with Toronto. So he was a pretty decent player. He then obviously played with the Montreal Canadiens, was a 2-time 40-goal scorer with them, and then he was part of the infamous trade with Bobby Smith, where Mark Napier and Keith Acton were sent to Minnesota for Bobby Smith. Montreal did well with the trade, considering Bobby Smith won a Stanley Cup in Montreal and then went to another final. Mark Napier did win a Stanley Cup himself. He won one with Montreal in his first NHL season in 78-79, the last of the 4 of their dynasty, and then he won a Stanley Cup with Edmonton in 85 during their second Stanley Cup. He then went to Buffalo, where he finished his career in the NHL and went off overseas. But after he moved from Montreal, he just didn't have the same type of numbers. Next up, we get Gary Innes, Indianapolis Racers goalie. The Indianapolis Racers are famous for being the first team that Wayne Gretzky played for, though I think he only played 10 games, or was it 6 games? He didn't play long, Gretzky didn't. And then he was traded over to Edmonton at a flip of a coin on an airplane, according to the story. Gary Innes had played with the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Philadelphia Flyers, before jumping to the W in 1977, played 2 years in the WHA, and after it collapsed, he then went on to play with the Washington Capitals for 2 seasons and then played 3 games in 80-81 before finally hanging him up. He did coach the Hershey Bears too. Indianapolis Racers folded mid-season. They never finished the season. Next up, Mark Tardif, now with Quebec Nordiques. He's pictured here in his Los Angeles Sharks uniform. Los Angeles Sharks had folded long before 77, I believe. Mark Tardif was a first-round number 2 overall draft pick by the Montreal Canadiens in 1969. He had won Stanley Cups in 1971 and 73. He was a pretty good goal scorer in Montreal, but Montreal's depth just kept him from being more. Got to remember the Canadiens were loaded in the 70s. He jumped to the WHA. He played for the Los Angeles Sharks back in 1973-74. So they're using an old picture of him for this card in 77. So the Sharks hadn't been around for a long time. Then he played for the Michigan Stags, Baltimore Blades. You got to remember in the WHA there were teams that moved midway through the season. They just couldn't make a go of it in Michigan, so they went to Baltimore and didn't last much longer there. Then he jumped to the Quebec Nordiques. I believe he won an Avco Cup with them. And then when they came to the NHL in 1979, Tardif played another 4 years in the NHL and had some good stats: 33 goals, 23 goals, 39 goals, and 21 goals. So he was a consistent goal scorer. His best season was he scored 71 goals, 77 assists for 148 points in 1975-76, and then again in 77-78 he scored 65 goals, 89 assists for 154 points. Tardif is the all-time leading goal scorer in the WHA. In 446 games, he had 316 goals, 350 assists for 666 points. Added 27 more goals and 32 assists for 59 points in 44 playoff games with him. His NHL stats aren't bad: 517 games, 194 goals, 207 assists for 401 points. 62 playoff games, he added 13 goals, 15 assists for 28 points. So this guy was a good hockey player, but because he wasn't going to get as much playing time in Montreal, and they weren't going to release him or trade him, though they probably could have, he went to the W, where they probably offered more money too, and was happy there. Next up, Mark Howe, left wing, New England Whalers. So he's now with the New England Whalers. He got traded to the Houston Aeros from the Houston. So he went from the Houston Aeros to New England Whalers with his father and his brother. Houston knew they weren't getting an expansion team in the NHL, so they folded, and at the end of the 77 season. Now, Mark Howe was originally drafted by the Boston Bruins, second round, 25th overall in 1974, which by today's standards would have made him a round 1 draft pick. But he wanted to play, he liked the idea of playing with his brother and his dad. That was the whole gist of moving over. And the fact that he played left wing, not defense, is kind of interesting. So they played 4 full years in Houston, won an Avco trophy, and they went to another final. Went to a couple of finals, I believe. Then he went to New England with the Whalers. 2 seasons in the W there. He had 107 points in his last year in the W. 42 goals, 65 assists. And then he moved on to the NHL with his dad and brother for Gordie Howe's final season. And then somewhere along the way, he switched to being a defenseman. In 1982, Hartford traded him to the Philadelphia Flyers, where he played. He went to 2 Stanley Cup finals with them, before finally going to the Detroit Red Wings for the last 3 years of his career. Never won the Norris Trophy, though he was up for consideration a lot of years. So he's traded from Hartford with round 3 pick in the 83 draft to Philadelphia Flyers for Kenny Linsman, Greg Adams, and a bunch of draft picks, which never amounted to much. But Mark Howe is one of the major stars that come out of the WHA. Next up, we got Peter Sullivan, left wing, Winnipeg Jets. Peter Sullivan was a 7th round, 95th overall pick by the Montreal Canadiens in the 1971 draft. And he spent a lot of years in the AHL before finally jumping to the WHA because he wasn't good enough to crack the Habs lineup. And he had really good numbers in the AHL. So he played with the Winnipeg Jets, won 2 Avco trophies, and then played 2 more years in the NHL when the Winnipeg Jets moved there, before finishing his career in the minors. Had a pretty decent WHA career, just didn't translate to the NHL. Next up we get Dave Dryden, goalie for the Edmonton Oilers. He just passed away this year. He's the brother of Ken Dryden, the older brother of Ken Dryden. He was never drafted. Played one game with the New York Rangers, then he went to Chicago. And then when Chicago got Tony Esposito, he then jumped over to Buffalo, or he might have been picked in the expansion draft, I'm not sure. Played 4 seasons with Buffalo before jumping to the WHA and played for the Chicago Cougars and then the Edmonton Oilers. And when the Edmonton Oilers went to the NHL, he played 14 games with them. Didn't do so well before hanging up the blades. So he did play with Wayne Gretzky for 2 years. Next up, we got Andre Lacroix, now with the Houston Aeros, center. He's got the San Diego Mariners jersey, which was a pretty plain jersey. He'd actually played 4 seasons with the Philadelphia Flyers, and then a season with the Chicago Blackhawks, before moving to the W, where he played for the Philadelphia Blazers, the New York Golden Blaze Jersey Knights. That was a team that started in New York, but then moved over to New Jersey. 3 seasons with the San Diego Mariners, and then the 77-78 season with the Houston Aeros. And then they folded. Played his last year with the New England Whalers and the Hartford Whalers. Played 29 games back in the NHL. So with these cards, these 77 set, there's a lot of player movement. Tons of player movement. Pauline Bordelot, right wing, Quebec Nordiques, now with Quebec Nordiques. He's got his Vancouver Canucks jersey on. He was drafted in the 2nd round, 19th overall in the 73 amateur draft by the Vancouver Canucks. He played his first 3 seasons in Vancouver. And then in 1976, he jumped to the Quebec Nordiques. So this is already a year late. They could have got a picture with him with his Quebec jersey. He played 3 more years in the W before going off to over to France for a year. But you think they could have found a jersey with him in Quebec because he played a full season before these cards were released. All right, Juha Whiting, center for the Edmonton Oilers. He's now with the Edmonton Oilers. This is he's wearing an LA Kings uniform. They often called him Whiting. He's one of the first European players to play in the NHL, like from Finland. Never drafted, signed as a free agent. Although he was born in Finland, he did play in the Brandon Wheat Kings and then the Omaha Knights before the Rangers gave him a tryout. Then they traded him to LA near the end of the season. And he played 520 games with the LA Kings. He was traded in 77 to the Cleveland Barons. He had 4 20-goal seasons in the NHL. Then he went to the Edmonton Oilers in 77-78. And that was it. He never played with Gretzky, because Gretzky came around in 78-79. Rosary Paymont. I think that's how you pronounce that name, Rosary. Now with the Indianapolis Racers. Went from the New England Whalers to the Indianapolis Racers. He had played with the Philadelphia Flyers and the Vancouver Canucks before jumping to the WHA in 72. Then he played for the Chicago 3 years with the Chicago Cougars, a full season with the Whalers, and then midway through the 76-77 season, he went to Indianapolis, and then played 1 final year in Indianapolis in 77-78. Wasn't a bad player in either league. Never got to play with Gretzky, though. And finally, we got Gary Bromley, goalie with the Winnipeg Jets. He's in his Calgary Cowboy uniform. The Cowboys had folded in 1977, so before this, at the start of the 77-78 season, which is what these cards are, Calgary had folded and all the players had been shifted off to other teams. Bromley played for the Buffalo Sabres, and he was with the Sabres when they went to the Stanley Cup Final in 75, where they lost to the Philadelphia Flyers in 6 games. Him and Gary Desharnais were the goalies for that Sabres team. Then with the arrival of Donnie Edwards, he decided to leave and headed to the W. Played a full season with the Calgary Cowboys. Then he played 1 full season with the Winnipeg Jets. Came back to the NHL with the Vancouver Canucks. I have that card for Gary Bromley. And played 3 seasons in Vancouver before finally hanging them up. He wasn't getting any playing time but behind Richard Brodeur. Left the NHL in 81, spent 1 more year in the minors, and that was it. But he had been to a Stanley Cup Final, which is pretty cool. I love these old WHA cards. They're just the teams, the team names, the jerseys, the amount of player movement is amazing, especially with this set. A lot of teams folded. These cards are actually in fairly good shape because this one has a crease in it, but most of them are in decent shape. I can't complain. The Mark Howe card is excellent shape. The corners are pretty crisp. It's got some minor dings up here, but it's clear. Centering's off. But for what I paid with taxes, I paid 20 bucks for this whole thing, for all 15 cards. Mark Howe was worth $5. His dad, Gordy, who I happen to have, is worth, in mint condition, $50. Mine's got some dings in the corner because I've had this forever. It's one of the last cards I have of the W, but that was the most expensive card. Bobby Hall would be the next most expensive in the checklist. So this is the final WHA set. They never released one in '78, and then by '79 the merger was on. So a little bit of his hockey history when a rival league tried to take on the NHL, and they won and lost. They lost because the league is gone, but they won because some of their teams actually made it to the NHL and won Stanley Cups. These cards will go a long way to completing the set, which I'm going to try and do in the next couple of months, is go after this set. Small set and should be easy. I got the most expensive card already, even though it's in rough shape. And we'll go from there. Anyway, any hockey card enthusiasts and WHA fans, let me know if you guys ever collected these cards or do have these cards. And what do you think about the WHA sets and all the uniforms and jerseys? Leave comments in the comment section, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new to the channel. Until next time, this has been Hockey Night in Belmont.